AKT. Bex, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everybody. My name's Bex, as Joe said. So I'm the Senior Media Officer at AKT. We're a queer youth homelessness charity. And today I'm basically going to be taking you through different ways that, queer people have been impacted by homelessness, how we're responding to it, what we can expect frontline workers to do to support that. So I'm just gonna, Joe, it said that you've not allowed me to share my screen.
Sorry, try now.
Okay. Perfect. Right. So let me just sort it out. Hang on. Okay, so what's it like being an LGBTQ+ young person facing homelessness in the UK? Presented by myself. So I'll just quickly tell you that my role is Senior Media Officer. So I raise awareness around queer youth homelessness and its intersecting issues through national, regional, and sector-specific coverage, some of which I write myself. And I do a lot of media training with our young people, and I've been at AKT for a year and 3 months now. So what's it like being an LGBTQ+ young person facing homelessness in the UK? In this presentation, I'm going to be looking at who AKT is, why LGBTQ+ youth homelessness is such an issue, the impact of COVID, the LGBTQ+ youth homelessness report, young people's experiences of homelessness, our recommendations, what you can do to support, and there'll be some time for questions. Firstly, who is AKT? So we're an LGBTQ+ youth homelessness charity founded in 1989 by our straight ally, Kath Hall, who I actually interviewed for our 30-year anniversary last year. So we're based in Newcastle, Manchester, London, and Bristol, though we have a national reach. So we support young people aged 16 to 25 who are facing homelessness, abuse, or familial rejection. We do this by providing emergency accommodation, specialist housing support, tenancy starter packs, life skills training, mentorships, and holding hangouts. So we support queer young people into safer homes so that they can secure better futures. So why is LGBTQ+ youth homelessness such an issue? 24% of the youth homelessness population in the UK is LGBTQ+. This means they're overrepresented within this demographic. The transient nature of LGBTQ+ young people's homelessness means many, out of desperation and a lack of options, resort to casual sex to secure a bed for the night, sleep in gay saunas, or ride the buses all night. They become hidden homeless, And with this, they fall under the radar of local authorities and are left out of official statistics. This lack of visibility into the forms of homelessness and the challenges faced by queer young people means mainstream services are unaware and unable to support this group properly. So the pandemic has exacerbated the issue of queer youth homelessness across the country. It's increased tensions at home during the pandemic, and this has led to many queer young people running away from home to escape homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic bullying, or it's led to them being kicked out. As a result, AKT saw a 118% increase in new referrals between April to August 2020 compared with the year before. Our services had to actually pause on new referrals whilst we hired additional paid and temp caseworkers to deal with the surge in demand. Many young people were dealing with financial insecurities. This is another major thing. The gig economy was one of the worst hit by COVID, and many of our young people work within it. They were now struggling with unemployment, unable to afford their rent. They were running up rent arrears and being evicted despite the eviction ban. And now, at the end of the month, the eviction ban is set to lift. and we're expecting to see another surge in unemployment as those LGBTQ plus young people who are living independently now face being evicted from their homes. Money stresses are, of course, negatively impacting the mental health of queer young people. We know that unemployment and poor mental health disproportionately impacts Black, trans, and disabled people. The Black queer men we support who have been rough sleeping have told us about the discrimination they face when they're sleeping rough. Arguably, they're one of the most vulnerable groups in society, and yet they're often targeted by police to be moved away or along. This actually prevents them from receiving support from Crisis, which is an intervention service, or people like StreetLink, who require a person to be stationary for a certain amount of time. Additionally, trans people who are homeless are finding themselves being discriminated against by being refused access to single-sex hostels. A lack of options for gender-neutral accommodation means many resort to sleeping rough or other equally dangerous alternatives. So to give voice to these marginalized experiences of queer young people struggling with homelessness, we launched the LGBTQ+ Youth Homelessness Report last month. So the report looks at the impact of homelessness, familial abuse, and discrimination faced when accessing services. It also provides recommendations for providers, policymakers, and funders to make their services more inclusive and to support queer young people better. Firstly, what are the experiences of LGBTQ+ young people facing homelessness? So firstly, family abuse is a big one. We know that 77% of the young people who come to us, cite familial rejection as the key reason behind their homelessness. According to the young people who took part in our report, 50% feared expressing their LGBTQ+ identity would lead to their being evicted. 1 in 6 of respondents were forced to do sexual acts against their will by a family member. And 14% of trans young people have had abusive content about them published online by a family member prior to becoming homeless. And a worryingly 74% of disabled LGBTQ+ young people were belittled to the point of feeling worthless. Next, we're going to look at the impact of homelessness on LGBTQ+ young people and what that looked like. So almost 1/5 of respondents felt they had to resort to casual sex to find a bed for the night. This, of course, comes with the risk of exploitation and increased risk of exposure to HIV, particularly for men who have sex with men. 2/3 said homelessness made it hard for them to establish or maintain new relationships or friendships. As we all know, human connection is vital, and not being able to establish meaningful connections can result in queer young people feeling isolated, unsupported, and having poor mental health. And 1 in 5 of disabled queer young people we surveyed were forced to engage in sex work to finance themselves. Here, we can see that homelessness is impacting queer young people in such a way that they feel compelled to engage in more risk-taking behaviours, which brings additional risks around consent and health. It's also very isolating and prevents them from forming meaningful relationships, and therefore reducing the likelihood of them forming a supportive network, something that is essential when you're vulnerable and homeless. The many queer young people, once homeless, experience discrimination from services they've accessed. This includes housing services, mental health services, and money support services, among others. Unfortunately, over half of the young people we surveyed have faced some form of discrimination or harassment from services they've accessed. 40% of trans young people experienced misgendering or dead naming from services. 43% of LGBTQ+ people of colour felt services did not understand what support to provide them because they were queer. So it's evident from our research and the people we interviewed and surveyed that mainstream support services lack the knowledge into queer experiences and awareness of these identities to create a welcoming, safe, and supportive environment. Instead, they're contributing to the structural barriers that keep queer young people marginalised and vulnerable, and therefore excluded from mainstream conversations around homelessness. So it's important to acknowledge the disproportionate impact of many of the themes we found in the report on people of colour, trans people, and those with a disability. For instance, 33% of queer people of colour were unaware of any support services available to them, compared with 21% of white respondents. This tells us that mainstream service providers need to be doing more targeted outreach to ethnic minority communities to ensure they're aware of all the help available to them. 28% of disabled queer young people took drugs for the first time whilst homeless, compared to 15% who weren't disabled, thus increasing the likelihood of substance misuse and poor mental health amongst queer disabled people. And 40% of trans young people who had access to support service report experiencing misgendering or dead naming. Again, Again, knowledge around trans identities and experiences and knowing how to ask service users their pronouns would help avoid this. So what needs to be done? How do we ensure queer young people facing homelessness are supported out of homelessness? So AKT is calling on service providers, funders, and policymakers to respond to the issue of queer youth homelessness by implementing our recommendations. These recommendations include developing an LGBTQ+ housing strategy that's inclusive of queer young people who are trans, disabled, or people of colour particularly. Local authorities to conduct an audit to identify why so many queer young people don't turn to their local authority for support. The LGBTQ+ sector to ensure safeguarding measures are in place for all LGBTQ+ service users that may be facing homelessness, and for local authorities to ensure domestic violence cases against queer young people are accurately recorded, particularly in the homelessness case level collection data. So these are just some of the main recommendations we have. They do, however, boil down to these three key areas, which I'm now going to go into. So the first being mandatory monitoring. Currently, there is a lack of data into the housing outcomes, needs, and specific support required by queer young people facing homelessness. However, if local authorities and housing services monitor the sexual orientation and gender identity of service users, they would be able to identify the needs of these queer young people and therefore scope the general need of the queer youth population. This information can then be used to provide tailored support that can be delivered by frontline staff who have undergone LGBTQ+ awareness training. The increased visibility of data around LGBTQ+ youth homelessness can lead to increased opportunities for funding. Once the scope of the issue is understood, staff can undergo training or more funding can be accessed to support the demand for services. The second area of focus of our recommendations is prevention-focused intervention. So this is all about taking early action in a young person's life to prevent their issues from escalating. For example, a teacher in a school were able to pick up on a young person having issues at home where they were struggling with living in a hostile environment. That teacher then linked that LGBTQ+ young person up with a housing support provider or a mental health support service. This would allow the young person to access support straight away, thus the chance for that young person to reach crisis point would be limited, and so would the longer term impacts of homelessness. And finally, cross-sector partnership is a third and final focus for our recommendations. Just gonna have a quick sip of my water, hang on. LGBTQ+ youth homelessness is rarely a standalone issue. Recognition of the wraparound issues that come with an LGBTQ+ young person struggling with homelessness is critical to acknowledge when delivering support. This is why cross-sector partnerships between local authorities and mainstream services with community organisations and specialist support services is vital. Hence, this is why referral pathways with specialist support are important. When an LGBTQ+ young person presents as homeless to their local authority, that local authority should be able to refer that young person to us, as we have experience dealing with their complex needs. The same goes for if that person was struggling with substance misuse specifically, they should then be referred to a specialist service within this field. Ultimately, it is all about taking early action in a young person's life so as to prevent the issue from escalating, again, so as to limit the longer term impact of homelessness. Also a cost-effective method, as it's relying on specialists coming together to utilise their experiences so as to ensure a better outcome in that young person's life. How can you help? As frontline service workers or service providers, what can you do to make sure your services are more inclusive of LGBTQ+ young people facing homelessness? So at AKT, we actually have a toolkit for this, which sits on our website, and I'll quickly show you it now. So if you were to go on www.akt.org.uk/briefings, you come to this page, and then you would just scroll down, find out more about inclusive service provisions. And then this is the toolkit for making services more inclusive of queer young people. So number one, ensure your monitoring of sexual orientation and gender identity is inclusive. So here, we encourage people to refer to Stonewall's toolkit, which takes you through their 4-step program on how to monitor sexual orientation and gender identity safely, and how to break down barriers LGBT people face when accessing services. So again, I'll show you that. So this is Stonewall's toolkit for making your services more inclusive, and basically it's 4 steps on how to create a situation where you can monitor the gender identity or sexual orientation of your service users, and like ways to navigate that. So how to ask them that and make them feel comfortable and safe. So if you're interested, you would just need to email memberships@stonewall.org.uk, and then you'd be able to access that resource. Right, so number 2, use inclusive language and don't make assumptions. So you could put your pronouns in your email signature. Also get into the habit of asking service users what their pronouns are, and use the term your partner when talking about relationships, rather than saying your boyfriend or girlfriend and assuming the gender identity or sexual orientation of the partner. Number 3, visual cues. So use representative posters to reflect diverse ethnic backgrounds in the illustrations you use for your branding. Also, use the inclusive pride flag to make an environment welcoming, and information guides as well would be helpful for this. So you can reach out to us on contact@akt.org.uk, and we can talk you through ways to visually make your brand more inclusive. Number 4, connect young people with or make a referral or information request on their behalf to LGBTQ+ specific services like AKT. And this would provide them with specialist service. Examples of specialist services include AKT, of course, Mermaids, which is a charity for trans children, Stonewall, or the Terence Higgins Trust, the HIV charity. Openly challenge homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic language used by staff or clients and explain why it's offensive. Ensure adequate processes are in place to report this internally. Number 6, it's important to respect people's privacy and boundaries. Some young people might not feel comfortable talking in detail about their identity, even if they've chosen to disclose it. So it's important to respect people's boundaries and don't, assume that somebody wants to talk about gay issues or trans issues because they've disclosed the fact that they're trans or gay. Number 7, ask before you share someone's information. So it's crucial to respect someone's right to confidentiality around their identity. Number 8, it's vital also to consider the additional barriers and layers of multiple discrimination that further marginalized groups face, like queer people of color, trans and disabled queer young people, particularly when they're accessing housing and healthcare. So this section is for those people working in the housing or homelessness sector who want to make their services more inclusive. A, consider the particular vulnerabilities of queer young people of color who are trans, disabled, or have insecure immigration statuses. Their experiences of domestic abuse, homophobic or transphobic harassment, mental and physical harm, and financial struggles. These need to be kept in mind when establishing priority need and determining intentional homelessness. Ensure that cases where LGBTQ+ young people have experienced domestic abuse are accurately recorded in internal case management software and homelessness case level detection data. C, ensure LGBTQ+ youth homelessness is treated as a priority and commission training for all staff members where appropriate. And finally, for online support for young LGBT clients, visit AKT's live chat on our homepage to access instant support available when the chat icon is visible. So I'll just show you that. So go to AKT's homepage. Okay, so right now the person's offline, but when they're online, it will say, help, are you age 16 to 25 and LGBTQ+, and then the person would just click on that. And then we have a digital caseworker who's manning that 5 days a week from about 9 till 6 p.m. So they'll get back to you and be able to offer you immediate support. Scroll to the page. So unfortunately, because of COVID and the lack of support services, homelessness across the UK is on the rise. LGBTQ+ youth homelessness included within that figure. So since 2010, the rough sleeping figure has risen by 52%. This situation is likely to deteriorate unless we can all work together to end queer youth homelessness. Ultimately, we believe no young person should have to choose between a safe home and being who they are. So let's not make them. Thanks so much for sitting through the presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.
Brilliant. Cheers for that, Bex. I thought that was really informative. There's a couple of questions. If anyone else has any questions, if you stick them in the Q&A box, I'll be able to see them and then ask them over to Bex. Bex, one of the questions that sort of comes through is around sort of data that's already collected, because you mentioned that one of the things that kind of needs to be done is collecting more data. So someone's asked sort of what sort of information on demographics is already collected? Like, is there data on sexual orientation or gender identity already being collected by local authorities?
So the issue is that a lot of local authorities do not, they don't actually collect this data, which is why that we've pushed this. Basically, our report has highlighted the need for collecting this data. And our next sort of campaign is all about mandatory monitoring. And in that, we're basically asking local authorities and service providers to actually start collecting the gender identity and sexual orientation of their service users, to give all of us, charities and local authorities, a better idea of the scope of the issue, so that we can then put in interventions and take steps to better support these young people. But as it stands, most local authorities do not, to my knowledge, record that. I can double check for you with the person that works on policy and campaigns, but I'm pretty sure that they don't collect it, which is why we're doing this push for them to do that.
Yeah, cool, that makes sense. And for anyone who's not read the AKT report, I would really recommend it. It's a really good report on sort of what's happening, and it's really accessible in terms of language and understanding. And I will email it out to people after this if people haven't already seen it, so that people can have a link to it. I think it's really, Bex has just put it in the chat, so brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it's really worth spending a bit of time just having a read through it. Bex, I've just got a question on sort of language and evolving of language. And I think sometimes people can possibly be nervous around language because it evolves. And if you're not part of a certain community, you might not be aware of changing language or evolving language. So should people feel nervous about changing language? And if they possibly are, how can people possibly educate themselves around language and terms to use?
I think if people want to educate themselves, Stonewall is a really good place to start. I know that they have a lot of like toolkits and resources all around like the correct terminology to use and ways to avoid, you know, having that confidence to ask people about their pronouns and how to navigate that. So I would say Stonewall, is a really good resource to use for that. I mean, I think it can be quite sticky, because I think on the one hand, people want to be able to like have open conversation and engage, but on the other hand, they're probably nervous of like slipping up or using the wrong pronouns. So I would say, where possible, always ask somebody what their pronouns are. Don't assume, so always ask, regardless of how they're presenting. I would say, if you do slip up and you do reuse the wrong terminology, just quickly correct yourself and then just, move on. I would say don't deliberate on it, because the more panic you attribute to that moment, the more nervous you'll be in future when it comes to like trying to navigate language around identity. So sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful, but I would say Stonewall, always ask pronouns, and where you slip up, just apologize and carry on going. Somebody's never going to be upset if you ask about their pronouns, so it's better to be on the safer side than not, I would say.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you for that. And then as well, sort of at the minute, I know you said as well, one of the things you was possibly looking at doing was sort of AKT was looking at like conducting an audit as to why sort of people don't turn to sort of local authorities and services at the minute. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming part of the reason to do that audit is because the information and knowledge doesn't necessarily exist, or it doesn't exist on paper to be able to sort of turn around and show, look, here's what's happening. But sort of, are there any sort of current sort of feelings or maybe suspicions as to why people aren't turning to services at the minute?
I would say that a lot of people don't go to local authorities because there's like that barrier. So they feel as if it's sort of like a vicious circle. A lot of local authorities don't necessarily have the training or awareness into queer youth homelessness, and they don't know how young people that are queer can present as homeless. So as I was saying, a lot of queer young people will be like sleeping in gay saunas or engaging in like risky sex, using hookup apps to find a bed for the night, or sleeping on buses or sofa surfing. And a lot of the time, they might not even recognize that they're actually homeless. Or in turn, local authorities won't put two and two together, and they won't be recorded in that number, and therefore they'll be left out of official statistics, and the support wouldn't be put in place for them. So I'd say that there's like a bit of a breakdown in the relationship there. And also, I think a lot of queer young people can be quite scared as well. And I think that they maybe feel as if local authorities won't necessarily understand them. So they go to places like AKT or I guess their friends, because they feel like we have the knowledge to support them. Actually, all services should have that knowledge, and they shouldn't feel like they're pigeonholed into only going to certain services rather than going to the mainstream services that are there to support all people that are struggling with homelessness.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers for that. And someone has asked, do you support LGBTQ plus young people who are NRPF? Yeah, so they have no recourse to public funds.
Yeah, we do support them. We also support those people, yeah. We've actually recently done like a statement on our website, which is basically calling the government to not deport people that are have insecure immigration status because they're homeless. So yeah, we do support those people, and they're very welcome to come to us.
Brilliant, thank you. And someone has just asked, could you just explain what a gay sauna is?
Gay saunas, they're basically, it's you know what, let me Google it because I don't want to get it wrong. Okay, it's basically like a community space where men have sex with other men, but it's also doubles up as a bit of like social area and also a bit of a spa kind of area. So we do get a lot of young gay men who are homeless, run away from home, or maybe been kicked away from their homes because of their LGBTQ plus identity, and they're going to saunas just to find a place to stay for the night, because often they can be open 24-hour or very late to the night. So I guess it's an option for a roof over their head.
Cool, brilliant, thank you. Someone else has asked, so sort of obviously the impact of COVID and sort of support and applications and stuff being done over the phone and online rather than face to face, has that sort of changed anything, possibly made it easier or made it more difficult?
Well, it's been really, really busy for us. So because of with COVID and being in lockdown, it's massively increased tensions at home. So a lot of queer young people that are now at home a lot of the time because schools were closed are at home with parents that are homophobic, biphobic, transphobic, can be abusive, and they've made that time at home really difficult for these young people. We've had cases where they've been kicked away from their homes, or they've had to run away to flee abuse. And because of that, a lot of young people are homeless, and a lot of them have been rough sleeping because of the fact that they weren't able to sofa surf because of lockdown. So as a result of that, there's been a huge spike in demand for our services. And actually, in April to August of last year, 2020, we saw a 118% increase in demand for our services in comparison to 2019. So obviously that massive demand, we need to have the services to support that. So we've actually had to hire new permanent caseworkers, a new assistant director of services, and a new digital caseworker. So they work online, offering online mentoring support all across the country. So we've really increased our online offer to be able to support people. We've upped it with the phone calls. Where necessary, we have taken the precautions to meet somebody to support them in person. So yeah, it's been a really busy time, and we've basically had to bring on more staff to help with the increase in demand.
Yeah, I think COVID has had a massive impact across the board about how people access services and how people can support the individuals that they're working with.
And also, sorry, just to add to that, there's also been a bigger demand on us because of the erosion of a lot of community support services that would have normally been there, but because of a lack of funding, have had to close down, which means that there's more young people feeling ostracized and more are coming to us out of need. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And someone else asked, do you support young people who are neurodivergent?
Could you
So,
clarify?
yeah, so I guess people who possibly on the autism spectrum, ADHD, possibly like speech and language, so possibly dyslexic as well.
So in cases where we feel like the queer young person needs specific services, we would then signpost them. So if it was the case that somebody had approached us who was trans and autistic, we would support them. But if we felt like they needed extra support because of their other situation, their condition, we'd then signpost them and then sort of like all work together to support that person.
Cool, brilliant. And yeah, and I think just generally on sort of neurodiversity in homelessness, I think there are specialist services out there. So just off the top of my head, Diversity and Ability, who are based down in Brighton, they do some really, really good work around neurodiversity, both generally, but also specifically in regards to homelessness. And Homeless Link on their website, I know they've got an autism and homelessness toolkit, which is really worth looking at if people are working with people who are possibly autistic. There was a question as well, just let me find it. So someone has said that they're working with someone who has come to their day centre, but is from out of the area, so they're unlikely to get housing or support from the local authority, but they are fleeing a homophobic attack and they sort of lack family support. However, they've been told to return. Sort of, they've referred into their local LGBTQ+ service, but is that also the sort of thing where AKT could help in possibly supporting that person or helping them get access to housing?
Yeah, 100%, definitely. Tell that person to contact us or make a referral in their name. We'd 100% be able to support them.
Brilliant. And do you provide support in Wales, or is it just in England at the minute?
So it's currently just in England, across England, but if somebody from Wales did contact us, we would be able to signpost them to a service provider in Wales that specialises in queer youth homelessness. So be able to signpost that person to support them.
Brilliant. I'm just trying to see if we've got any more questions.
I think I saw one question. Somebody asked what dead naming is. So dead naming is when you call somebody who's trans their birth name when they've changed their name as part of their gender transition. So that name is dead to them because they no longer identify with the gender associated with that name.
Brilliant. So yeah, I don't have any more questions. I don't know if anyone else does. I'm not seeing anything else in the Q&A. So yeah, I don't have any more questions. I would just say, if, like Beck said, if people have any more questions, go to the AKT website, go to the Stonewall website. The other organisations that you mentioned there, Beck's, Mermaid, Terence Higgins Trust as well, they both do really, really good work in this area. So go and have a look at their websites and familiarise yourself with the work that they do, because they do some really, really good work, and they are really worth knowing about. Yeah, and like I said, we'll send the links are in the chat, but we'll also send these out via email as well. So people haven't, if you've missed them, don't worry about scrolling back up through the chat. I know that can be a real nightmare if you're trying to find something in the chat and there's loads of people just going back and forth. And like I said, I really would recommend reading the report. It is a really, really good report that AKT have done. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say apart from thank you, Bex, for coming and doing this. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to say before we wrap up.
Just to say thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, like Joe said, if you want to know anything more about resources around queer youth homelessness, definitely check out our report. I've linked it in the chat, but Joe will share it. And I also linked a website for a link for Stonewall all about best practices and resources, so make sure to refer to that. And any other questions, always contact AKT. We're happy to help.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bex, and thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. I hope you are able to go enjoy the rest of your afternoon wherever you were joining us from. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.